And to kind of kick us off, I want to first start with doing a land acknowledgement. And I want to acknowledge that even though we are meeting virtually, and the majority of us might be in the Seattle metro area, uh, this land is the unceded ancestral lands of the coastal Salish peoples, the traditional home of all tribes and the bands within the Duwamish, Squamish, Tulalip, and Muckleshoot nations. And we recognize that the impacts of that history are still playing out today. And I ask that we take the opportunity to thank the original caretakers of this land. And if you're joining us from somewhere else outside the Puget Sound region, I would ask that you also take the time to learn a bit more about the land that you are on and the treaties that govern those lands, and just dig a little deeper. So SVP is excited to co-host this event. And I'm also excited to make an important introduction for all of you who are joining us today. On her 9th day, I'd like to introduce Emiko Atherton, who is the new Executive Director of SVP Seattle, to just tell a little bit more.
Great, thanks. Thanks, Mike, and good afternoon to all of you who are joining us. I see some familiar names and faces, and also a lot of new ones. So thank you for having me. As Mike mentioned, this is my 9th day on the job, and about a month of being here in Seattle, although I am a Seattle native of sorts. I was born and raised in Southeast Seattle and worked here for many years. And I've been in Washington, D.C. for a little over 5 years. So it's great to come back to really what I consider home and do work right rooted in the place that I grew up in and that gave me so much. Thank you all for joining us. If you're not familiar with SVP Seattle, you can see our mission statement right up there. But what we do is connect and invest in people and organizations, really with the aim that together we can co-create these thriving, sustainable, and just communities. We do this in different ways. We do invest in organizations, but we do more than just that. We connect and engage individuals. We invest in collaborative solutions like the ones we're going to hear about today, all while funding and strengthening nonprofits so that we can really contribute to the great, I'd say, ecosystem of community here in Seattle, and also the ecosystem of change that needs to happen to make this a more inclusive and just place. And so with that, thank you. If I haven't met you, I look forward to meeting you, and please feel free to reach out, and I look forward to hearing each of your stories and figuring out more ways we can co-collaborate together. And with that, I'll turn it back to Mike.
Thank you.